Jhoira, Captain of the Weatherlight, is a free for 4 mana, blue and red, that has an ability. Whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. Historics are artifacts, legendaries and sagas. And she has 2 builds that you can go for. Either you go for a stax build, playing a lot of artifacts like Cursed Totem and maybe even Torpor Orb to shut down your opponents and control them and shut them out of the game. And with Jhoira, you would be able to draw a lot of cards with this, so that you're going through your deck and finding your combo pieces and putting together a combo win. But you could also go for a Storm build, playing Aetherflux Reservoir and trying to win with that, and playing a lot of artifacts like Mox Amber, a ritual you could call it, that it costs 0 mana but produces 1 mana. Basically it produces more mana compared to what it costs, and with Jhoira you would draw a card from Mox Amber. And then also just digging through your deck until you find your Aetherflux Reservoir and win the game by that. However, in this video, in this deck tech, we are going to be doing a hybrid build. We are going to be doing the both things together. Both playing stax pieces and storm. Trying to use our stax pieces as storm cards. So how are we actually going to do this? So we are going to be playing a lot of artifacts like Ethereum Sculptor that reduces the casting cost of artifact spells. This is also an artifact, so we're going to be drawing a card with this thing. But then we're going to be playing a strange thing. You probably forgot it because it was so bad, but this could actually be played inside this deck. It also reduces the cost of each colorless card, meaning artifacts also get a reduction. So whenever you have these 2 in play, Torpor Orb costs 0. So you cast Torpor Orb for 0, Jhoira trigger and draw you a card. And you draw into Cursed Totem and cast that one as well. And just repeat and go forward with this. However, we do have to avoid certain stax cards, such as Sphere of Resistance. Sphere of Resistance is a good stax card versus Storm, and we are playing a Storm deck, so we are going to be avoiding Sphere of Resistance, because it increases the cost of every card you play. Pretty much doing the anti-thing, the wrong thing that we want to do. We want to reduce the cost of everything we do, so Sphere of Resistance should not be played in this deck. However, we are going to be playing this stax piece. Trinsphere is a 3 mana cost artifact that makes every spell cost a minimum of 3 mana. For example, if someone wants to cast a Dark Ritual for 1 black mana, Trinsphere will make Dark Ritual cost a minimum of 3 mana, making Dark Ritual pretty useless to cast. But there's something to Trinsphere. Whenever it is tapped, it is, you could call it deactive, not really active and functional. You could basically say that you can turn it on and off by tapping it and untapping it. And we are going to be doing a little bit of a trick. We are going to be using Gyarados Aether Grid to tap Trinsphere whenever we want to go for a storm run, whenever we want to try to win. Let me also just put Winter Orb and Static Orb in here as well. So these 3 artifacts have all the same static ability. Whenever they are tapped, they do nothing. Whenever they are untapped, they do something. So Static Orb prevents permanents from untapping, and you only untap 2 things during your untap step. And the same with Winter Orb, you are forced to only untap 1 land. But in your upkeep, in your last opponent's end step, we activate Gyarados Aether Grid and tap these 2 artifacts to deal 1 damage to something. Let's say a Bird of Paradise. And then we go to our untap step and untap everything, including our lands, going around Winter Orb and ignoring its effect, applying a stax and a huge problem for our opponents that we are not forced to deal with. In the end, we are going to be building a huge industry and be using this lightning grid over and over to deal a lot of damage, and turning this lightning grid into a secondary win con, a secondary storm card like Aetherflux Reservoir. But we're also going to play a lot more artifact tappers, like this thing. We can bind it to an artifact, let's say a stax piece. Then we can tap Trinsphere to draw a card. Kinda cool. Then we can also play this thing, Winter Orb. Now we can tap Winter Orb to deal 2 damage to something. But we can also play Clock of Omen. And with Clock of Omen we can turn a lot of staxy control artifacts into mana rocks. So here we have Curse Totem and Jhoira's Familiar, also decreasing the casting cost of artifacts, and actually historic spell, but mostly artifacts. So we tap these two artifacts to untap Mana Vault. With all of these tapping and untapping artifact shenanigans, we could be playing Key to the City. This is a card drawing engine. Whenever this thing becomes untapped, you can pay 2 mana to draw a card. The part where you tap it, discard a card and make something unblockable isn't really interesting. We don't really want to go to combat with our commander Jhoira. But we do want to tap something, like let's say we tap 2 artifacts to untap this thing. And then we have this creature card equipped and binded to this Key to the City. So we start with tapping this thing to deal 2 damage to something. And then we activate Clock of Omens to untap this thing. And when it becomes untapped, you will draw a card. Also, when you get your Paradox engine into play, your Key to the City become pretty bonkers. But I did say that we were going to be using Jhoira per Aether Grid as a storm version, another version of Aetherflux Reservoir. And this is how we are going to be doing that. So Paradox engine is pretty much going to be auto-included into this deck. And this is how it's going to be done. So let's say that we tap these 2 artifacts and activate this Lightning Grid's ability to deal 1 damage to a creature card or player. And then we cast Soul Ring and Paradox Engine trigger, and we untap everything, building up a more and more strange Gatling Gun power, and then eventually Gatling Gun down all of our opponents. But before you actually have Paradox Engine in play and a good storm run that you can go for, Jhoira per Aether Grid is still going to sit there and control the board state, destroying hate bears such as this thing. This is one of the biggest problems for this deck that we could run into. She is increasing the casting cost of everything that we want to do, except creature cards, and we play really low amount of creature cards, so this is going to be a big problem. But with the Jhoira per Aether Grid, we can just send her to bygone. Analyzing how everything looks currently, we can definitely say that you can build a much faster storm build with Jhoira. However, I do think that this version, this build, this hybrid build, is much more resilient compared to the original one. Because you actually don't need Jhoira to be in play all the time. Because normally, whenever Jhoira isn't in play, you're doing nothing. But this build is doing a lot of things. It's putting stacks pieces onto the battlefield, controlling the board state and controlling your opponents and making sure that they can't win. And eventually you are going to be able to cast Jhoira and then storm off eventually. Therefore, you should definitely play stacks pieces in this deck that aren't historic spells, meaning artifacts and legendaries and sagas, such as Back to Basic, one of the strongest stacks pieces inside the game, but also Blood Moon. And from here you should basically figure out that we're only going to be playing basic lands, and our land count is going to be really low. But from this, I will definitely tell you that you can win games straight up with only Blood Moon. There are many decks out there in the competitive format that will simply die to a Blood Moon. There is a quite popular card called Hermit Druid, which basically plays no basic land whatsoever, because once you activate Hermit Druid you win, because you have no basic land inside your deck. You're going to put your entire deck into your graveyard and then cast Dread Return, putting whatever creature card you want from your graveyard into play, and from there scoring a win. However, once you have a Blood Moon in play, that deck can't do anything except sit and watch until they draw something that will produce green mana to cast Nature's Claim and destroy your Blood Moon. They're not happy about that card. And because of that, we should be definitely playing this thing, Magus of the Moon, another version of Blood Moon, a creature card that can be killed, but still, Blood Moon is so good that we want to have more copies of it. I am also going to be playing Psychosis Crawler inside this hybrid deck. It's also similar to how we can use Aetherflux Reservoir, because whenever we draw a card, each opponent will lose a life. So we could definitely kill all of our opponents with this thing and Jhoira together. That will give us 3 different versions of Aetherflux Reservoir similar ID things, I could say. Well, Jhoira per Aether Grid kinda needs Paradox Engine to function, And Psychosis Crawler is demanding a lot of card draw. But in the end, they should do the job. You might not win the first storm run you go for, but Psychosis Crawler and Jhoira per 8 grid can sit there and accumulate value over time and eventually grind them out of the game. We could also be playing this thing. Whenever you draw a card, deal 1 damage to a creature or player. However, I am definitely going to skip this one out because the mana cost is huge. It's a lot easier to cast something for 5 mana in all colorless compared to this thing. 4 mana that requires a color, that is problematic. It's legendary, so we would draw a card from Jhoira with this, but the problem is also this. It only deals damage to 1 target, meaning that we have to have 120 cards inside our deck to be able to deal 40 life to one player, then 40 life to another player, and 40 life to a third player. And that is quite hard to do. They might have a lot of low amount of life currently, so it's going to be easier, but in the end I don't think that this card should be in this deck. I'm also going to put in Tesseret the Seeker, quite obvious. He is historic, he is legendary, so we are going to be drawing a card with Jhoira. He can also be used to, you can sacrifice him, removing all loyalty counters from him to put Aetherflux Reservoir into play. So we are gaining another version of Aetherflux Reservoir, you could say, from Tesseret the Seeker. But he will also do something more. He will help us out break parity against our own static orb, because he can untap artifacts. So you go to your untap step, only untap 2 things, then you activate Tesseret and untap more artifacts to be able to go around static orb. But also, if one of our opponent has an Eidolon of Rheatic in play, preventing us from playing more than 1 spell each turn, we basically can't storm off. And if for some reason we can't get rid of this creature card disenchantment, then we can use Tesseret's ultimate ability to transform all of our artifacts into big 5/5 creature cards and swing with everything we got against that player, killing that player and getting rid of this thing, and then try to storm off potentially the next turn or maybe even the same turn. In my build I also have some utility planeswalkers like Daretti Scrapper Savant. Usually he's used to discard 2 land cards to draw 2 new cards, looting through your deck. But you could actually use this thing to resurrect your Aetherflux Reservoir or maybe Paradox Engine, because sometimes your opponents are successfully going to counterspell or destroy them during the storm run, and then this guy is basically a resurrect button. But we can also play Duck Faden for some utility. He also has a looting power, draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards. That's quite functional when we want to discard away land cards. But also this guy can steal artifacts, and that is pretty neat, sometimes quite useful. But when you're putting this deck together, I highly recommend playing all these 4 cards. They are all doing the same thing. We did mention 2 of them in the beginning of the video. They are all decreasing the casting cost of artifacts. This is going to make us just flip artifacts over, and they kinda create a semi-paradox engine. But you also need to know about paradoxical outcome, one of the biggest storm trick within the format. What this does is choose any number of non-land permanents and return them to your hand in instant speed. For every permanent card returned this way, draw a card. Great. This is the trick. So let's say that we have a Mana Vault in play that is tapped. We have a Mox Opal in play that is also tapped. And then we have a tapped Mana Vault and maybe even a tapped Soul Ring. So we target paradoxical outcome with all of these 4 artifacts, return them to our hand, and then we just recast them again for less mana. So what this is actually creating is both card draw but also ritual, because we are kind of untapping these things, but we're also drawing cards with them from this thing. But also, because our commander is Jhoira, we will be drawing cards with all of these artifacts again when we're recasting them. Paradoxical outcome is truly the key to success, because it's both ritual and also card draw. It produces mana and it produces card draw, and that is exactly what you want to have when you are trying to go for a storm win. There are also some alternatives to paradoxical outcome. 3 other options that are usually being played. We have rebuild, return all artifacts to all owners' hand. Then we have Hurl's Recall. Target a player. That player returns all the artifacts to his or her hand. It's both a control card, but in our deck, in this build, it's a storm card, ritual card. We return all the artifacts we have that are tapped and recast them. And then we have Retrace. Return all your artifacts to your hand. Basically an escape mechanism for mirrors. But in the end, all these free cards are returning every little artifact we have. Basically they have a little bit of a problem as they are returning stacks pieces from play to your hand, and that might be suboptimal. In the end we could open up the game for our opponents. Here is, for example, 4 stacks pieces that I don't want them to be returned to my hand. First we have Defense Grid. Once this is gone, maybe our opponent is capable of casting counterspells, and maybe they will counterspell our Paradox Engine or Aetherflux Reservoir. And then we have Piffing Needle, which can lock down win cons that can win an instant speed. And maybe there is a Rasaket in play that is Piffing Needle is locking down, and I don't want a Rasaket to be open to draw counterspells like Force of Will by sacrificing mana dogs. The same with Phyrexian Revoker and also Conqueror's Flail. If Conqueror's Flail is equipped to Jhoira, our opponents can't do spells during our turn. But if we somehow return Conqueror's Flail with something, then the game is suddenly open for them. But the difference with Paradoxal Outcome is that we choose what we are going to be returning, which means that we can leave these stacks pieces in play and keep them active. In the end, this hybrid build is both control and both combo win storm. You can win games quite fast. You have every form of fast artifact in this deck that is producing a turn to Jhoira. And then in your next turn, you basically play a bunch of artifacts, draw a lot of cards, produce a lot of mana, and then maybe throwing down a Paradoxal Engine, and then just going through your entire deck and winning with either Psychosis Scroll or Aetherflux Reservoir or the Aethergrid Chains of Lightning Staff. And it's quite interesting to see how this deck is using control cards as storm pieces. Basically throwing down a random artifact for 2 mana that is a stacks piece, and turning it into a card drawing engine. And turning it later also into a industry. Basically what Jhoira is doing is building up a huge industry that is going to kill everything, but also going to lock down the game and controlling it. Now if you wanna see the entire deck list, card by card, everything inside my Jhoira hybrid stacks and control storm build, then you can find a link to a tapped out page in the description below, where you can find the entire deck list. Thank you for hanging out and following this video. Take care everyone.